There are two sides to every issue. Then there's hers, Danielle Smith, on 770 CHQR. Call or text now, 974-8255. Out of town toll free, 1-800-563-7770. Danielle Smith on 770 CHQR.
Brought to you by the Popowich Carmeli Advisory Group, CIBC Wood Gundy.
All right, I got someone saying in the news they spoke about the Onyx purchase of WestJet Airlines. It should be Transat. No, I think Onyx did purchase WestJet, and then Air Canada is purchasing Transat. But I have to get into a little bit more of understanding why they think that that's offside with our laws. Once again, all of these ridiculous rules that apply to our airline industry that no longer make sense. I've made a note of that for a follow-up. There is a conference coming up on September the 17th. It is called EnergyDisruptors.com, and the vision of it is a profit-for-purpose organization with a bold ambition to unite, isn't that nice, the entire spectrum of the energy industry around the common goal of accelerating pragmatic and profitable solutions to the world's biggest energy challenges. Already, I think that that's worthwhile talking about. They've got a whole number of speakers who are lined up, and one of the speakers is my next guest, Peter Tertzakian. And I don't know where you might have heard his name, but one of the things that I guess I got introduced to him as an author. He wrote a book called The End of Energy Obesity, which was very influential in how I thought about the challenge that we had in moving to a greener and cleaner economy. And I asked him just in the break before we started whether it was a 10-year-old book, whether or not there's anything that needs an update. And in fact, he was so visionary. He says, no, there's a lot there that we could just begin to start seeing implemented now. He is an economist, an investment strategist, an advisor, a best-selling officer, and a public speaker on issues vital to the future of energy. I also mentioned he's executive director at ARC Energy Research Institute, and he joins me now. Peter Tertzakian is my guest. Peter, thank you so much for being with me.
I am so delighted to be here, Danielle. It's been too long since we've spoken.
It has, and I've always enjoyed listening to you speak.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could remind people or tell people who didn't read your book, The End of Energy Obesity, the sort of the premise that you had, because we are pretty big energy guzzlers in North America, but you also had a vision for how natural gas could be one of the solutions, or at least a transition solution.
Yeah, the book really, as the name implies, is energy obesity, the metaphor of needing to get leaner in our energy consumption, which really was what the book was about. But leaner not only in terms of the way that we consume it, but also what we consume. And I argued 10 years ago that we've got this issue, climate change, as well as many other environmental sustainability issues, and that the substitution of coal with natural gas is a compelling substitution to help reduce emissions. Since then, over the course of the last 10 years, we've seen the United States really dramatically reduce their emissions as a consequence of that kind of strategy, and people are talking more and more about it, including us with our LNG, et cetera.
Let's also, you painted a really interesting vision for what communities of the future could look like, and how you would have an integrated community that could use some of the renewable technologies with natural gas. And again, that because it's just been influential on my thinking about how we need to move in stages. Can you just describe what you think the future looks like?
Well, the future is going to be multi-system. In other words, it's not just going to be 100% renewables. Nice and utopian as that may sound, it's going to have to be all the different energy systems. And really, the book argued that we're going to have all these energy systems and we should optimize them, again, to be as lean as we possibly can. That's on the supply side. So we're going to have natural gas, we're going to have renewables, we're probably going to have a lot less coal, and so on. And we are going to be switching to electrification, albeit it's going to take a long time. But in the interim period, we just really need to think about how to make our systems more efficient. Again, hence that need to be lean metaphor. I use a lot of food metaphors, eat healthier, exercise, and so on. And you're just going to be more sustainable personally. And the metaphors are so apt when we think about energy going forward.
Do you think that most leaders have now understood the message of natural gas? I was struck by how anti-fossil fuel the bulk of the Trudeau government messaging was when they came in, and then there was a surprising moment where Jim Carr all of a sudden talked about natural gas being a way to reduce global emissions, and I've even heard Environment Minister Catherine McKenna say the same thing. And so I'm beginning to wonder if and you've got John Horgan as well. He might be opposed to our bitumen, but he's not opposed to LNG. And so is there some kind of meeting of the minds that is happening here?
I think so, certainly from a governmental perspective, and behind the scenes, many countries around the world are using more natural gas as a substitute for coal, including China and other Southeast Asian countries. I don't think the realization is fully set in and digested by the more radical environmental groups. Their view is still that the diet has to be 100% solar, wind, geothermal, and other renewables, and that merely bridging with natural gas is the wrong diet. And I think that they have to come around because it's we need all the different systems. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we still burn wood, and we've been doing that for, I don't know, a couple million years. It hasn't been completely phased out. So why would we think natural gas is going to be phased out, or any of these other fuels that we use?
Well, here's what I'm curious about is this conference is trying to bring together energy disruptors to unite.
Right.
And I just wonder if there's so large a divide that unity might be impossible. If you've got the one group saying solar, wind, geothermal are the only answers, and we're looking at the immense cost of doing that, plus you're telling us it all has to be done within 12 years, I just wonder where the common ground might be for energy disruptors. What does that look like? I've talked with Michael Schellenberger, who's come to much the same conclusion that solar and wind can't power an industrial economy, and so his solution is nuclear. Mm-hmm. What are you expecting to be the solution?
Well, I think the solutions come from other disciplines. And so with respect to the conference, Energy Disruptors, September 17th, 18th, I've really got to hand it to Graham and Michelle Edge, who organized the first one last year. It was a tremendous success. I think over 1,000 people, expecting a couple thousand this year. And I think that the speakers they have, for example, Malcolm Gladwell, Sir Keith Robinson, and so other sort of people from outside the industry, it's absolutely important, because I'm a firm believer that we can learn the lessons from, say, disruption in retail, disruption in your business, the media business, disruption in all sorts of industries around us. So why would we expect that oil and gas and energy isn't going to be disrupted? Right? I mean, look at retail. I mean, the corner bookstore, the corner grocery store has been sort of bulldozed by the Walmarts and then the Amazons, and we've got a completely different way of buying things. It's not that we're not buying anything, it's just that it's changed. So in energy, it's going to be disrupted not only within oil and gas, but the whole energy complex as a whole. And so Energy Disruptors brings in speakers from all over the place to try and get the conversation going. And I hear you, we've got the very polarized, loud extremities of people. And I think that Disruptors and a whole bunch of other initiatives, including what I'm trying to do, is trying to catalyze that rational middle. Because that's where the conversation needs to go.
And I hope there is a rational middle, because when you look at, for instance, every year when they have Earth Hour and they expect us to go around for an hour turning off all of our lights and sitting in the dark, I mean, that is not a compelling vision for me. If that's what having a lower carbon footprint looks like, you're going to lose people, because people don't want to live that way. Or if the only way to do travel is to have somebody give you a solar boat so that you can travel somewhere for 2 weeks, that's not an option that is available to the mass majority of people. And so if these are being put forward as the solutions, I find that is actually more alienating. It's not getting greater buy-in.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think 10 years ago in my book, I talked about that, saying that it is very politically difficult to tell people you can't go on vacation, you need to turn all your lights on. The Jimmy Carter thing, for those who remember, in the 1970s, I think it was 79, he said, turn down your thermostat and put on more sweaters. It's just, we're not in that kind of world where people find personal change, yet it is a personal dimension. I mean, as I like to say, the business of energy is everybody's business. There's nothing you do that doesn't consume energy, whether it's heat your house or move around or turn the lights on. So at the end of the day, the solution to reducing emissions and climate change and things like that is actually very personal solutions. And the minute you start impinging on personal territory about what you can and can't do, it gets much more difficult.
It certainly does. Let's take a pause. When we get back, we're going to continue our discussion with Peter Tertzakian, Executive Director at ARC Energy Research Institute. He's participating in a conference, it sounds like it's the second year. Last year, 1,000 people up, this year, 2,000, where they are trying to find a way to unify us all on pragmatic and profitable solutions. They have this term that I think I saw here, talking about the future of energy abundance. Wouldn't that be something to strive for? How do we get energy abundance at the same time as moving to greener fuels? We'll find out if we've got some solutions when we return on 770 CHQR. All right, guys, you know I'm on a mission to find environmentalists that we can talk to about pragmatic solutions. I found a couple, and maybe there'll be a few more that come out of this summit. Peter Tertzakian is executive director at ARC Energy Research Institute, talking about disruption, energy disruptors, how this industry is going to change. And Peter, when I was speaking earlier with Matthew August and David Robinson, they painted a pretty bleak vision of a city, of an industry, particularly just focused on Alberta, where our energy, our oil sands assets get stranded, and then we're deprived of capital as well as of insurance, and so the industry just asphyxiates. And I don't like that as a vision. I figure there's got to be something else that's disruptive that is a lot more positive than that. Can you give us some hope?
I can give you some hope, though I can't diminish the seriousness of the situation currently. I mean, being asphyxiated of capital and all the other issues are definitely issues today. But these are hallmarks of major disruption. We've seen these sorts of stories in the past in other industries, even in our own energy industry. I can come back to that later, but just to say that, if we think of the retail business, if we think of the newspaper business, I mean, these are industries and businesses that have undergone massive disruption, and they've gone through their real low points. And then they figured out strategies of how to restructure the business, how to come out of it, how to address these issues. And that's happening. I believe that's happening. So I don't think that the outlook for the next year or so is any different than it is right now. But I would say give it 3 to 5 years and we are going to have a very lean and mean and very different looking business, especially if we can catalyze the intent of the Energy Disruptors Conference, for example, by having some rational discussions and some new strategies in terms of working around these very complicated issues.
Well, let me put something on the table, and you can tell me some of the other things we should be thinking about. One of the things is I've read articles suggesting CNRL wants to be a net zero emissions producer. I was thinking, well, if it's net zeros, how are they going to get their number one? And once they become the industry leader on that, then that technology gets shared, and all of a sudden we could be a leader when it comes to producing our energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example of a company that is looking forward, actually acknowledging that disruption is happening, the need for change. And regardless of what technologies they use, carbon capture, solvents, what have you, the point is that they are using technology to change the game. You know, the green energy movement seems to think that they have the exclusive domain or the exclusive rights to new technology. But what's happening is that new technologies, whether it's digital or physical, is actually now being employed by conventional oil and gas producers like CNRL. And as they adopt and change them, all of a sudden we can have a different conversation. We say, okay, we are now net zero, or maybe in some instances, some companies I know may go even below net zero, absolute zero, let's say. Now what would you say about the oil industry? Is that green? What is the definition of green and clean? Upstream, supply side, we've done our bit. Now it's up to the consumer.
And that's where it gets complicated.
That's where it gets complicated.
So what else should we be looking for out of this conference when we're talking about the kind of disruptions that are coming down the line?
Well, I'd like to think that my session, and I hope people come and hear my session, is disruptive. I've published 2 books, as you know, and I'm publishing a 3rd one coming up in about February. It's self-publishing, but it's much more than a book, and I'm really super excited. It's you can think of a combination of a museum, a library of stories that have lessons, and a business school, and all 3 in one on a digital platform. That's what I'll be giving a sneak peek at the Disruptors Conference.
That sounds great. What's in the museum?
Well, the museum contains a lot of my personal artifacts relating to energy history, books, postcards, objects like antique light bulbs from the Edison era. It's a whole museum I've collected for 25 years, and I've always wanted to put it online, so that's what's going to happen.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So what should we be thinking when we look forward to the future? I mean, you've got young kids now who look at the future and they think it's really bleak.
Right.
You've got millennials thinking that they can't have children because it's so devastating for the planet. I just don't know, once we start seeing that younger generation become so hopeless, how do we turn that around to create some alternative visions that can be hopeful? Yeah,
what's happening is that we are getting caught up in, I think psychologically it's called the recency bias. We're just very focused on the doom and gloom of the current present. And certainly what my project is trying to do, it's called the Energy File Project, is to take the lessons of the past and say, hey, wait a minute, here's a story from the past, relax. Here's how it ends. Here's how you can strategize around it to get comfort about where we're going for the future. So the whole idea is look at the past, get some lessons, bring it to the present, juxtapose it on our problems today, say, oh yeah, that seems to make sense, and then let's have a conversation for the future.
I'd love to hear one of those stories, because
Sure.
one of the things I saw, I went to an Institute for Humane Studies seminar years ago, and there was one speaker who talked about the energy industry and looking at a barrel of oil. There was initially one component that we wanted to get out of that, and we kept having all these byproducts. And then he went through the whole history of everything that became a byproduct or waste product. We found some useful purpose for it and monetized it. And I'm just wondering if that's kind of the new story of carbon dioxide, is just finding another useful purpose to monetize a new stream.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we can look back in history and see even, the coal industry as an example. Okay, everybody reviles the coal industry, but let's just use it as a historical guide and a lesson. Okay, so they were being put out of business in locomotion. Steam locomotives were going to diesel, right? Well, the coal industry said, fine, we'll relinquish that market, but we're going to go into power generation, which they did for 100 years. Now they're being displaced out of power, and who knows what they'll do. But the point is that, the minute you think you're in demise, that there are other ways of thinking about your business. And, I've got a lot of stories that just talk about environmental issues, social policy issues, technology is a big one, economy, and competition. And I even have the ethical issues, for example, I've got a story on chimney sweeps, right, which is a really grim chapter in our energy history.
I've got to hear that, because my husband, if you can believe it, was actually a chimney sweep as one of his early jobs. Yeah, no, seriously.
Okay. Well, it wasn't a chimney sweep of the 19th century where it was a grim, the chimney sweeps were basically child slave labor. And we used to send young boys, especially some girls, up chimneys to clean them out. And it was really a horrific chapter. And the question really I pose is, well, why did it take so long to get rid of this practice, even in this legislation? Long story short, there's lessons to be learned, right? And also lessons to be learned in understanding that some of these things take a long time to flow through. And so much of the resistance to change is at a personal, individual level. And I think that's where we are today. And we get back full circle to the conversation we were having earlier when it comes to reducing emissions. So much of the decision of reducing emission is in personal hands. Right? And the resistance, we need to understand those psychological forces that are at play now if we are going to unlock where we're going forward.
All right. Well, I may have to schedule an opportunity to talk with you after this conference is over, because I'm quite interested to see how the clash of ideas is going to turn out. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's always a delight.
Yeah, that's Peter Tertzakian, Executive Director at ARC Energy Research Institute, economist, investment strategist, advisor, best-selling author of soon-to-be his third book, public speaker on issues vital to the future of energy, and he will be a speaker at this upcoming conference. If you want to check it out, it's energydisruptors.com. And they've got a whole list of speakers, including Malcolm Gladwell. He also a prominent author on a whole variety of books. I think his last one may have been Outliers. Yeah, I think I read that one too. So check it out, energydisruptors.com, and I promise you we'll do a follow-up. Stay with us. We'll be right back on 770 CHQR.